At 0847 on the morning of August 9, 1944, Sergeant Frank Russo sat in the gunner's position of M4 Sherman tank Cobra King, 2 kilometers southeast of Mortain, France, watching a German Panther tank materialize through the morning haze at 1,600 yards. His right hand rested on the elevation wheel. His left hand gripped the traverse control. The Panther's 88mm gun was tracking across the ridgeline where Cobra King sat hull down behind a low stone wall. Standard U.S. Army gunnery doctrine said maximum effective range for Russo's 75mm gun against armored targets was 800 yards. The Panther was twice that distance. The shot was impossible. Russo cranked the elevation wheel anyway, felt resistance he didn't understand, ignored it, centered the Panther in his optical sight, pressed the firing pedal. The gun recoiled. 4 seconds later, the Panther exploded in a fireball that sent black smoke boiling 300 feet into the French sky. Russo had just made a shot that every gunnery instructor at Fort Knox would have called impossible. He had no idea how he'd done it, and in the next 2 weeks, the accidental technique that made that shot possible would spread through American tank battalions like wildfire, change kill ratios from 3-to-1 German favor to nearly even, and save hundreds of crews from burning alive in kill zones where doctrine said they had no chance. Between June 6th and August 8th, 1944, American tank battalions in Normandy lost 217 Sherman tanks to long-range German fire. Not to ambushes, not to mechanical failure, to what the crews called getting sniped. The pattern never changed. Your Sherman would be advancing across open ground, moving through wheat fields or bocage country, following roads that intelligence said were clear. Then your tank would shudder from an impact you never saw coming. 88mm armor-piercing round, punching through frontal armor like it was tin foil. Sometimes the crew survived long enough to bail out. Usually they didn't. By the time your gunner acquired the German tank and returned fire, either the Panther had already displaced to a new position, or your 75mm round fell short, throwing up dirt 200 yards from the target. You couldn't fight back. You could only die or run. The Germans owned a 600-yard engagement zone where they could kill American tanks with complete impunity, while American return fire scattered uselessly across empty fields. The mathematics of the problem were brutal and simple. The M4 Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could fire an M61 armor-piercing round at 2,030 feet per second muzzle velocity. Effective range against armored vehicles, per official U.S. Army doctrine as of June 1944, 800 yards. Beyond 800 yards, trajectory drop made accurate fire unreliable. Wind deflection became significant. Target acquisition through the gunner's optical sight became difficult. The German Panther tank mounted an 88mm KTUK-42 L-70 gun that fired armor-piercing rounds at 3,950 feet per second, nearly twice the velocity of American tank rounds. Effective range, 1,400 yards. Accurate hits documented at 1,600 yards. The Panther could see farther, shoot farther, hit harder. German optics were superior. German fire control systems were better designed, and German tactics exploited every advantage. Panther commanders positioned their tanks in hull-down positions on distant ridgelines, waited for American armor to expose itself, then killed Shermans from ranges where American crews couldn't effectively respond. On July 17, 1944, near St. Lo, 2nd Platoon of Baker Company, 32nd Armored Regiment was advancing along a farm road when a single Panther appeared 1,500 yards to the northeast. The platoon had 5 Sherman tanks. The platoon leader called halt, tried to establish radio contact with battalion for artillery support. The Panther fired 6 rounds in 90 seconds. First round, destroyed the lead Sherman, penetrated frontal armor, killed the entire crew instantly. Second round missed. Third round destroyed the third Sherman in column, hitting ammunition storage, turret blown completely off the hull. Fourth round missed. Fifth round destroyed the platoon leader's tank. Sixth round destroyed the fourth Sherman. One surviving Sherman reversed behind a stone barn. Crew abandoned vehicle and fled on foot. Total engagement time, 90 seconds. 4 Shermans destroyed. 16 American tankers killed. The Panther displaced before American artillery could range its position. German crew suffered 0 casualties. This pattern repeated across Normandy every single day. American tank crews couldn't close within effective range before German tanks destroyed them. Doctrine said, avoid long-range engagements. Run if possible. Request artillery support. But running meant abandoning other tanks in your unit. Running meant watching your friends burn while you retreated. And artillery support took 30 minutes minimum to arrive. In 30 minutes, a Panther could kill a dozen Shermans and vanish. Frank Russo was 24 years old. Born in the Bronx, New York, 1920. His father owned a small machine shop on East 149th Street. Russo grew up surrounded by lathes, drill presses, precision measuring tools. He understood mechanical tolerances, understood how small measurements created large consequences. When other kids were playing stickball, Russo was learning how to calculate angles and read micrometers. He enlisted in the Army in January 1943, 6 weeks after his 23rd birthday. The recruiter asked what skills he had. Russo said he understood machines. The Army sent him to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Tank training, gunnery school. Russo excelled at gunnery, not because he had perfect eyesight or fast reflexes, because he understood trajectory mathematics. How gravity pulled a shell down as it flew, how wind pushed it left or right, how the angle of the gun barrel determined where the round would impact. His instructors taught standard doctrine, 800 yards maximum effective range, standard elevation settings, standard aiming points. But Russo kept doing calculations in his head. The math suggested 75mm rounds should be able to reach farther than 800 yards. Should be able to hit targets at 1,000 yards, maybe more, if you adjusted elevation correctly. He mentioned this to his gunnery instructor once. The instructor said, "Theory doesn't matter, Private. Doctrine keeps you alive. Follow the manual." Russo learned to keep his theories to himself. He graduated near the top of his gunnery school class. Not the top. Third. The 2 gunners who scored higher than him both died in Normandy before Russo ever fired his first combat round. Russo deployed to England in March 1944, assigned as gunner on an M4 Sherman tank designated Cobra King. 3rd Armored Division, 32nd Armored Regiment, Baker Company. The crew of Cobra King consisted of 5 men who would spend the next year living inside 30 tons of welded steel, breathing each other's sweat, depending on each other for survival. Tank Commander. Lieutenant James Whitmore, 26 years old, from Cleveland, Ohio. Engineering degree from Ohio State University. Whitmore was methodical, careful, followed doctrine but listened to his crew. Driver. Corporal Michael Sullivan, 22, Chicago, Illinois. Everyone called him Mickey. He'd driven trucks for his father's delivery company before the war. He could put a Sherman through gaps that looked impossible. Assistant driver and bow gunner. Private Daniel Kowalski, 19, Detroit, Michigan. Youngest crew member. He manned the bow-mounted .30 caliber machine gun and operated the radio. Loader, Private Eddie Chen, 23, San Francisco, California. Chen's parents were in an internment camp in Utah. He'd volunteered for service anyway. Chen was meticulous about maintenance, kept the gun mechanism spotless. could load and fire faster than any loader in the battalion. The crew of Cobra King had been together for 31 combat days when August 9th arrived. They'd survived 31 days by following doctrine, avoiding unnecessary risks, and retreating when Panthers appeared at long range. They'd encountered German armor 4 times. All 4 encounters ended the same way. Spot Panther, estimate range at 1,200 to 1,500 yards, retreat behind cover, call for artillery or air support. 0 kills, 0 losses. The crew was good at staying alive. That was the best you could hope for in a Sherman. On July 28th, 1944, near Coutances, Cobra King was advancing in column formation with the rest of Baker Company when a German Panther appeared on a ridgeline 1,500 yards to the east. The battalion commander ordered immediate halt, called for artillery support. The Panther fired 3 rounds in 20 seconds. The first round hit the lead Sherman in the column, penetrated frontal armor between the driver's position and bow gunner's position. The Sherman erupted in flame. Nobody got out. The second round hit the third Sherman, hit the turret dead center. The turret separated from the hull completely, flipped backward, landed upside down 30 feet behind the burning chassis. The third round missed, impacted the ground between the 4th and 5th Shermans, threw dirt and rock fragments across both vehicles, but caused no damage. The Panther displaced immediately. By the time American artillery ranging rounds began falling, the German tank was gone. Russo had tracked the Panther through his optical sight during the entire engagement, had ranged the target using the reticle markings in his sight, 1,520 yards. When the Panther fired its first round, Russo had requested permission to return fire. Whitmore had said no, too far, outside effective range, but Russo fired anyway, 1 round, against orders, just to see. He cranked the elevation wheel to standard 800-yard setting, aimed center mass on the Panther, pressed the firing pedal, watched through his sight as the round fell short by approximately 300 yards, watched the 75mm shell impact dirt on the hillside, well below the German position, watched the Panther sit untouched, invulnerable, killing Americans with impunity while Russo's round threw up a useless fountain of French soil. That image burned into Russo's mind. His round falling short, 2 Shermans burning, 13 Americans dead. And there was nothing he could do about it because doctrine said 800 yards was maximum effective range, and the math said doctrine was wrong. But nobody cared about the math when doctrine was written by colonels who'd never sat in a gunner's seat watching their friends burn. On the evening of August 8th, 1944, Cobra King was parked in a battalion assembly area 2 kilometers south of Mortain. The crew was preparing for morning operations. Standard advance toward German positions. Intelligence reported minimal enemy resistance. Tank crews had learned to distrust intelligence. They performed evening maintenance quietly, methodically. Chen and Russo inspected the turret mechanisms. The 75mm gun elevation system consisted of a manual wheel connected through a gear assembly to the gun's trunnion mounts. Turn the wheel clockwise, gun elevated. Counterclockwise, gun depressed. Chen was checking the elevation wheel for smooth operation, making sure no debris had gotten into the gear teeth. He used his 5-pound steel toolbox as a temporary platform while working on the turret hatch overhead, needed both hands free to tighten a loose bolt. At 21:15 hours, the company commander's runner appeared. Immediate briefing for all tank commanders at battalion headquarters. Whitmore climbed out of Cobra King, headed toward the command tent. Chen climbed out right after him, hurrying to the briefing in case Whitmore needed him. In the rush, Chen forgot about his toolbox, left it sitting wedged under the elevation wheel housing. Russo saw the toolbox, assumed Chen would retrieve it when he returned. Neither man thought about it again. The night was quiet. Diesel generators rumbled. Distant artillery thumped somewhere to the east. Men wrote letters home by flashlight. Russo wrote to his mother. Short letter. Said they were pushing forward tomorrow. Said he should be okay. Said the war might be over by Christmas. He signed his name, sealed the envelope, handed it to Kowalski to add to the outgoing mail pouch. Then he climbed into a sleeping roll under Cobra King's left track and tried to sleep. He didn't know that Chen's forgotten toolbox, wedged under the gun elevation mechanism 5 feet above his head, would save his life in 9 hours and change American tank doctrine for the rest of the war. At 0630 hours on August 9, 1944, Baker Company moved out from the assembly area in column formation. 12 Sherman tanks rolling north toward Mortain through morning fog that clung to the ground like smoke. The objective was simple: secure a ridgeline overlooking the southern approach to town, establish observation positions, provide fire support for infantry advancing behind them. Intelligence reported German forces in the area were withdrawing, disorganized, offering minimal resistance. The intelligence was wrong. It was almost always wrong. But tank crews didn't write intelligence reports. They just followed orders and tried not to die. Cobra King rolled third in the column. Russo sat in his gunner's position, hands resting on traverse and elevation controls, eye pressed to the optical sight. The world through the sight was a narrow circle of gray-green landscape, wheat fields, scattered hedgerows, rolling terrain that could hide a Panther battalion. The fog was burning off quickly. Visibility improving. That was good for spotting enemy positions. Also good for enemy positions spotting you. At 0815, the lead Sherman reported contact. German infantry, small arms fire, no anti-tank weapons visible. The column continued advancing. Standard procedure. Bow gunners engaged infantry with 30 caliber machine guns, while the Shermans maintained forward momentum. By 0835, the column reached the base of the objective ridgeline. Whitmore ordered Cobra King into a hold-down position on the ridge crest. Mickey Sullivan drove the Sherman up the slope, positioned it so only the turret was exposed above them. Military crest. Perfect firing position, maximum protection. Russo traversed the turret slowly, scanning the horizon through his optical sight. At 0841, Russo saw something that made his stomach clench. Across a valley approximately 1,500 yards to the northeast, a dark, angular shape sat against the tree line. The magnification in his sight de masse wasn't sufficient to identify the vehicle definitively, but the shape was wrong. Too low to the ground, too wide, too deliberately positioned in a hull-down location that gave perfect fields of fire across the valley. Russo had seen enough Panthers to recognize the silhouette. He keyed the intercom. Possible enemy armor, 12 o'clock, extreme range. Whitmore brought his binoculars up, searched the tree line. 10 seconds passed. 15. Then Whitmore confirmed what Russo already knew. Panther, hold down position. Main gun tracking our ridgeline. Russo used his reticle markings to estimate range. The Panther's hull filled approximately 3 mils in his sight picture. He'd memorized the Panther's dimensions at Fort Knox. Hull width 3.4 meters. Basic trigonometry. Range equals target size divided by angular size times 1,000. 3.4 divided by 3 times 1,000 equals approximately 1,600 yards. Russo reported, range 1,600, confirmed. Whitmore's voice came back tight. That's outside our range. Kowalski, call for artillery support. Kowalski worked the radio, tried battalion fire support net. Came back negative. All fire support committed to 3rd Battalion engagement. Minimum wait time 30 minutes. 30 minutes meant the Panther could kill half the company before artillery rounds even left the tubes. The Panther hadn't fired yet, probably waiting for more American tanks to expose themselves on the ridgeline, waiting for targets of opportunity. German tank commanders were patient. They'd learned patience fighting on the Eastern Front, where patience meant survival and impatience meant death. Whitmore made a decision that violated everything they'd practiced for 31 combat days. "Russo, can you hit it?" Russo stared through his sight at the distant Panther. 1,600 yards, twice doctrine range. Every training manual said impossible. Every instructor said, don't try. But Russo thought about July 28th, thought about his round falling short, thought about 2 Shermans burning, thought about the math that said 75mm rounds could reach farther if you elevated the gun higher. "Doctrine says no, sir." Whitmore's response came back immediately. "I didn't ask about doctrine." Russo felt something shift in his chest. Permission to ignore doctrine. Permission to try what every instructor said would fail. "Give me 1 round. Let me walk it in." Walk it in meant fire, observe where the round impacted, adjust elevation, fire again. Standard artillery procedure, not standard tank gunnery procedure. But nothing about this engagement was standard. Whitmore keyed the intercom. "Chen, load AP, 1 round." Chen grabbed an M61 armor-piercing round from the ready rack. 20 pounds of steel and explosive, slammed it into the breech. The mechanism closed with a metallic clang that Russo felt through his feet. "Up," Chen reported. Gun loaded and ready. Russo cranked the elevation wheel for what he thought was an 800-yard shot. His plan was simple. Fire, watch the round fall short, calculate how much more elevation he needed, adjust, fire again. Basic iterative problem solving. What Russo didn't know was that Chen's 5-pound toolbox was still wedged under the elevation wheel housing from the previous night's maintenance. When Russo cranked the wheel, the gear assembly turned normally until it reached standard 800-yard elevation. Then the mechanism bound against the toolbox. The gears couldn't turn any farther because the toolbox was blocking the travel. But the wheel itself kept turning. The resistance felt normal to Russo because elevation wheels always had some resistance. The actual gun barrel elevated beyond standard position, 5 degrees beyond. The toolbox acted as an accidental cam, forcing the gun into an elevation that no gunnery manual specified. Russo was looking through his optical sight, not at the gun barrel. His sight picture looked normal because he was compensating for what he thought was 800-yard trajectory drop. He aimed center mass on the Panther, using the center reticle in his sight, standard aiming procedure. But the gun barrel was actually pointed 5 degrees higher than he thought, pointed at an angle that would send the round arcing high above the valley, coming down at a steep plunging angle instead of the relatively flat trajectory of a standard 800-yard shot. Russo had no idea any of this was happening. He just knew he had a Panther in his sight and permission to fire. Identified, Panther, 1,600 yards. His voice was steady. Years of training made the call automatic. Whitmore responded. "Fire when ready." Russo's hand moved to the firing pedal. His world narrowed to the circle of his optical sight. The Panther centered in the reticle. Everything else disappeared. No other tanks, no valley, no war. Just the sight picture and the target. "On the way." He pressed the pedal. The 75mm gun recoiled. The entire Sherman rocked backward from the recoil force. 14,000 pounds of recoil energy absorbed by the hydraulic recoil mechanism. Cordite smoke filled the turret instantly. The smell burned Russo's nostrils. His ears rang despite the headphones, but his eye never left the optical sight. He tracked the target, waiting to see where his round would impact, expecting to see dirt thrown up 300 yards short of the Panther, expecting to calculate his next adjustment. 4 seconds of flight time. The round arced high across the valley, climbing above the flat trajectory of a standard shot, reaching apogee at approximately 900 yards, then dropping in a steep parabolic curve. The shell came down not horizontally, but at nearly 45 degrees. Came down directly onto the Panther's turret roof. The armor there was 40 millimeters thick, designed to resist artillery fragments and aircraft rockets attacking from above. Not designed to resist a 75 millimeter armor-piercing round hitting at 45 degrees with enough residual velocity to punch completely through the steel. The round penetrated, detonated inside the turret. The Panther's ammunition stored in the turret sides cooked off instantly. 38 rounds of 88 millimeter ammunition exploding in a confined steel box. The Panther's turret erupted, a fireball 50 feet in diameter. Black smoke boiling upward. Secondary explosions throwing pieces of the turret 100 feet into the air, the entire vehicle shuddering from internal explosions. Flames shooting from every hatch. The Panther was dead, completely dead. From a shot that doctrine said was impossible. Inside Cobra King, complete silence for 3 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Russo stared through his sight at the burning Panther, not understanding what he was seeing. He'd fired expecting to miss, expecting to adjust and fire again. Instead, the Panther was exploding like someone had dropped a bomb on it. Sullivan's voice broke the silence, crackling over the intercom. "Holy shit, you hit it." Kowalski. "At 1,600 yards?" Chen. "That's impossible." But it wasn't impossible because they were all watching it burn. Russo pulled back from his sight, looked at Whitmore. The lieutenant was staring through his vision blocks at the distant fireball. Whitmore keyed the radio, reported to battalion. Cobra 3-3 to Cobra 6. Enemy armor destroyed. Panther, confirmed kill. The battalion commander's voice came back immediately. "Confirm range to target." Whitmore hesitated 1 second. 1,600 yards confirmed. Long pause on the radio. The entire battalion net was probably listening. Every tank commander wondering if they'd heard correctly. 1,600 yards. Nobody killed Panthers at 1,600 yards. The battalion commander finally responded, voice carefully neutral. "Outstanding shooting, Cobra 3-3. Continue mission." The radio went silent. Russo sat in his gunner's seat, hands trembling. He'd just killed a Panther at a range his instructors said was impossible, and he had absolutely no idea how he'd done it. The morning engagement continued. Baker Company consolidated positions on the ridgeline, established observation posts. Infantry moved up behind the tanks. German artillery started falling at 0920, but the fire was sporadic, poorly directed. By 1000 hours, the position was secure. Cobra King remained hull down on the ridge crest, providing overwatch for the M4 Company. Other crews came on the radio asking Russo how he'd made that shot. He didn't have an answer. Standard elevation, standard aim point, lucky hit. That's all he could say. But luck didn't explain a first-round hit at 1,600 yards. Luck didn't explain a 75 millimeter round penetrating a Panther's turret. Something else had happened. Something Russo didn't understand. At 11:30 hours, Whitmore ordered the crew to stand down for rations. They'd been in combat positions for 5 hours. Time to eat, check ammunition, perform maintenance. Russo climbed out of the gunner's position. His legs shook when he put weight on them. Adrenaline wearing off. The realization of what he'd done hitting him. He'd engaged a Panther at twice doctrine range. If he'd missed, the Panther would have fired back. would have killed Cobra King and probably 2 other Shermans before anyone could respond. Russo had bet 5 lives on a shot his training said would fail. And somehow, it had worked. Chen climbed into the turret to reload the ready rack. They'd fired 1 round. Standard procedure was to immediately reload, so you always had full ammunition available. Chen pulled a fresh armor-piercing round from the hull storage, maneuvered it toward the ready rack mounted on the turret wall. As he moved, his boot kicked something metal. He looked down, saw his 5-pound steel toolbox wedged under the elevation wheel housing. Chen froze, stared at the toolbox. His mind processed what he was seeing. The toolbox he'd left there last night during maintenance. The toolbox that should have been removed before the combat operations. The toolbox that was sitting exactly where it would interfere with the elevation mechanism. Oh no. Chen's voice was quiet. Oh shit. He reached down, pulled the toolbox out. The metal was warm from the gun's recoil heat. Whitmore heard Chen's voice, climbed into the turret. What is that? Chen held up the toolbox, face pale. I left it there last night during maintenance. I'm sorry, sir. I forgot to remove it before we moved out. Whitmore looked at the toolbox, looked at the elevation wheel, looked at the gun barrel. His engineering degree from Ohio State clicked into gear. He understood mechanical systems, understood how interfering with an elevation mechanism would change the gun's angle. He turned, looked through the vision blocks at the Panther still burning 1,600 yards across the valley. Did the math in his head. Standard elevation for 800 yards, approximately 3.2 degrees. If the toolbox prevented the mechanism from stopping at standard position, forced it to continue elevating another 4 or 5 degrees, total elevation would be 7 to 8 degrees. That would create a high arcing trajectory. Plunging fire instead of flat trajectory. Plunging fire would come down at a steep angle, would hit the target from above instead of horizontally. Whitmore climbed back down, found Russo sitting against Cobra King's track, eating cold rations. Russo, what elevation setting did you use for that shot? Russo swallowed his mouthful of hash. Standard 800 yards, sir. I was planning to walk the rounds in. Whitmore nodded slowly. Chen, put that toolbox back exactly where it was. Chen stared at him. Sir? Whitmore's voice was calm, deliberate. Put it back. That toolbox just killed a Panther at 1,600 yards. I want to know if it can do it again. Chen climbed back into the turret, wedged the toolbox under the elevation wheel housing, positioned it exactly where it had been. Whitmore gathered the crew, explained his theory. The toolbox blocked the elevation mechanism, forced the gun to elevate beyond standard position, created plunging fire. The round came down steep, hit the Panther's turret roof instead of frontal armor. Turret roof armor was thin, vulnerable. German engineers designed Panthers to resist horizontal fire from other tanks. They didn't expect plunging fire from tank guns because nobody shot at tanks from above. Artillery? Yes. Aircraft? Yes. But not other tanks. Except Russo just had, accidentally, because Chen forgot his toolbox. Sullivan spoke first. So you're saying we can hit Panthers at 1,600 yards because Eddie forgot his tools? Whitmore nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. Kowalski, that's insane. Whitmore, that's war. Insane things work. Smart things get you killed. We just accidentally discovered something that might save our lives. Russo understood immediately. If they could replicate the shot, if the toolbox created consistent over-elevation, they had a way to engage Panthers at ranges where Panthers thought they were safe. You want to test it? Whitmore nodded. If we get another long-range contact, yes. Same toolbox placement, same elevation procedure. See if it works twice. At 1847 hours, they got their chance. The battalion observation post reported 2 Panthers moving into positions northeast of Mortain. Range estimated at 1,400 to 1,500 yards. The Panthers were establishing overwatch positions, preparing to interdict American supply routes. Standard German tactic. Get into position before the Americans knew you were there, kill supply trucks and light vehicles, disrupt logistics. The battalion commander requested Cobra King engage if possible. Whitmore looked at Russo. Chen, toolbox stays in place. Russo, same elevation as this morning. Russo climbed into the gunner's position. His hands were sweating. This morning had been lucky, or accidental, or something. But repeating it meant proving it wasn't luck, meant proving the toolbox technique actually worked. At 1852, Russo acquired the first Panther through his sight. The German tank was moving slowly through bocage terrain, searching for a good firing position. Range, 1,450 yards. Closer than the morning shot, but still well beyond doctrine range. Russo tracked the Panther, led the movement slightly. Identified. Panther, 1450. Whitmore. Fire when ready. Russo cranked the elevation wheel, felt the resistance from the toolbox, ignored it like before, aimed center mass. His breath was steady. His hands were steady. Everything narrowed to the sight picture. He pressed the firing pedal. The gun fired. 3.5 seconds of flight time. The round arced high, came down steep, struck the Panther's turret top, penetrated. The Panther erupted in flames, stopped dead, smoke pouring from every hatch. The second Panther, alerted by the explosion of the first, immediately began reversing into cover. Moving target. 1,600 yards. Russo traversed right, tracked the movement. The Panther was backing up fast, driver panicking. Russo led the target, compensating for the vehicle's speed and direction. Fired. The round fell short, impacted ground 20 yards in front of the reversing Panther. Russo adjusted elevation slightly, added a quarter turn to the wheel, tracked the Panther, fired again. The round struck the Panther's turret roof. Same result. Penetration. Fire. The second Panther stopped, burning. Total engagement time, 42 seconds. 2 Panthers destroyed at ranges where they thought they were invulnerable. Russo pulled back from his sight. His hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from understanding. The toolbox worked. It actually worked. At 20:15 hours on August 9th, 1944, Lieutenant James Whitmore reported to the battalion command post. Colonel Marcus Webb, commander of 1st Battalion, 32nd Armored Regiment, was studying maps by lantern light when Whitmore entered. Webb was 42 years old, had been commanding tanks since North Africa, had lost 17 Shermans to long-range German fire in the past 3 months. He looked up when Whitmore saluted. Your gunner killed 3 Panthers today at extreme range. I want to know how. Whitmore explained. The toolbox, the accidental over-elevation, the plunging fire trajectory, the vulnerability of German turret roof armor. Webb listened without interrupting, his face showing nothing. When Whitmore finished, Webb leaned back in his chair. You're telling me a forgotten toolbox created a new gunnery technique? Whitmore nodded. Yes, sir. 3 confirmed kills at 1,400 to 1,600 yards. All turret roof penetrations, all first or second round hits. Webb stood, walked to the map board, studied the terrain. Can other crews replicate this? Whitmore had thought about this all afternoon. Any crew can over-elevate their gun 5 degrees beyond standard settings. doesn't require equipment modifications, just requires violating doctrine. Webb turned. If this works, why didn't gunnery school teach it? Whitmore chose his words carefully. Because doctrine was written for horizontal engagement. Nobody thought about plunging fire from tank guns. Artillery uses plunging fire. Aircraft use diving attacks. But tank versus tank combat was always assumed to be horizontal. The Germans designed their armor accordingly. Webb walked back to his desk, sat down, stared at Whitmore for 10 seconds. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours, your crew will demonstrate this technique to every tank commander in the battalion. If it works consistently, we're adopting it immediately. I don't care about doctrine. I care about dead Panthers and live Americans. August 10th, 1944, 0800 hours. 12 Sherman tanks assembled in firing positions along the ridgeline south of Mortain. 36 tank crewmen stood in a semicircle around Cobra King. The morning was cool, overcast. Rain threatened, but held off. Russo stood next to his Sherman, uncomfortable with the attention. He was a sergeant. Not an instructor, not an expert. Just a gunner who'd gotten lucky with a forgotten toolbox. Colonel Webb addressed the assembled crews. Sergeant Russo's technique extends our effective range by 800 yards. It exploits a vulnerability in German tank design. If it works, we can engage Panthers before they engage us. That changes everything. He turned to Russo. Show them. Russo climbed into Cobra King's turret. The target was the Panther he'd destroyed the previous morning, still sitting burned out at 1,600 yards across the valley. A stationary target, perfect for demonstration. Russo explained the technique over the battalion radio net so all crews could hear. Elevate your gun 5 degrees beyond standard doctrine setting for 800 yards. Use your optical sight normally. Aim center mass on the target. The round will arc high and come down at a steep angle. You're targeting roof armor, not frontal armor. He cranked Cobra King's elevation wheel. The toolbox was still wedged in place. The gun elevated to the same angle that had killed 3 Panthers yesterday. Russo aimed at the destroyed Panther's turret. On the way. He fired. 4 seconds later, the round struck the burned-out turret dead center. Even hitting a destroyed tank at 1,600 yards impressed the watching crews. Colonel Webb designated Staff Sergeant Paul Martinez as the second demonstration gunner. Martinez was 29 years old, from El Paso, Texas. He'd been a tanker since 1942. Survived North Africa and Sicily. He'd lost 2 loaders and 1 driver to German tank fire. Martinez climbed into his Sherman, designated Rough Rider. His crew didn't have a toolbox to jam the elevation mechanism, so Martinez had to estimate the 5-degree over-elevation manually. He cranked his wheel beyond standard 800-yard position, counting the clicks. Standard elevation, 16 clicks. Martinez cranked to 22 clicks, approximate 5-degree addition. He aimed at the destroyed Panther through his sight. Firing. The gun recoiled. The round arced across the valley, struck the Panther's hull just below the turret. Not a turret roof hit, but a solid impact at 1,600 yards using a technique Martinez had learned 5 minutes ago. Webb nodded. Next gunner. Corporal James Wilson from Iron Horse volunteered. Wilson was 22 from Birmingham, Alabama. He'd been in France for 6 weeks. 0 combat kills so far. Wilson elevated his gun, aimed, fired. His round struck the Panther's turret ring. Another solid hit. By 1200 hours, all 12 battalion gunners had fired at the destroyed Panther. Success rate, 8 hits out of 12 attempts, 67%. Standard doctrine success rate at 1,600 yards, 0%. The math was simple. Even a 67% hit probability was infinitely better than zero. Colonel Webb made his decision immediately. Effective immediately. All battalion tanks will adopt high-angle engagement protocol. Maintenance crews will fabricate elevation stops to create consistent 5-degree over-elevation. No more toolboxes. Proper mechanical stops welded into the elevation housing. He turned to his maintenance officer. How fast can we fabricate 12 elevation stops? The maintenance officer, Captain Donald Price, thought for 5 seconds. Simple welded bracket. 1/4-inch steel. We can have 12 stops fabricated and installed by 1800 hours today. Webb. Do it. And send a runner to division headquarters. I want authorization to brief this technique to other battalions. The technique needed a name. The crews started calling it the Russo elevation immediately. Russo hated the name, tried to get them to call it something else. High-angle fire, plunging fire technique. Anything but his name. But tank crews didn't care what Russo wanted. They knew who'd made the first shot, who'd proven it worked. By evening on August 10th, Russo elevation was the unofficial designation across 1st Battalion. August 11th, 1944. The German 7th Army launched a massive counterattack near Mortain. Hitler had personally ordered the attack. Objective? Drive west to Avranches, cut off American forces in Brittany, restore the German defensive line. The attack involved 4 Panzer divisions. Approximately 120 German tanks, including 53 Panthers and 15 Tigers. 1st Battalion, 32nd Armored Regiment held positions directly in the path of the German advance. At 0600 hours, German armor appeared on ridgelines 2,000 yards north and northeast of American positions. The Panthers came in carefully, using terrain, establishing hull-down positions at extreme range. Standard German tactic. Kill Americans from safety. Except this time, the Americans fired first. 8 Shermans using Russo elevation engaged German armor at ranges between 1,300 and 1,700 yards. The Germans had positioned themselves at what they thought were safe distances. They were wrong. The 1st Panther died at 0607. Staff Sergeant Martinez's shot, 1,600 yards, turret roof penetration. The 2nd Panther died at 0609. Corporal Wilson's shot, 1,500 yards. The Germans tried to adjust, moved their tanks, changed positions. But every time a Panther appeared at long range, American 75mm rounds came arcing down from above, plunging fire that German armor couldn't stop. By 0800 hours, 1st Battalion had destroyed 8 Panthers. American losses, 0 tanks. The exchange ratio had reversed completely. For the first time in the Normandy campaign, Shermans were winning long-range engagements against German armor. The German attack stalled. Panzer commanders radioed for artillery support, for air cover, for anything that would suppress the American tanks that were killing Panthers from impossible ranges. But American air superiority prevented German aircraft from intervening. American artillery was already engaged. The German tanks had to withdraw or die. They withdrew. By 0930 hours, German armor had pulled back to positions 3,000 yards north of American lines. Too far for tank engagement. The counterattack had failed. Not because of superior American tanks. Because American gunners could now kill Panthers before Panthers could kill them. 1st Battalion radio reports were monitored by 3rd Armored Division Headquarters. Major General Maurice Rose, Division Commander, wanted an immediate briefing. At 1400 hours, Colonel Webb and Lieutenant Whitmore drove to Division Headquarters, brought Russo with them. Rose was 55 years old, had commanded armor since before Pearl Harbor. He listened to the explanation of Russo elevation, watched film footage that battalion photographers had shot during the morning engagement, studied the kill statistics. 8 Panthers destroyed, 0 American losses, all kills at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. Rose made his decision in 30 seconds. This technique will be adopted across the entire division immediately. I'm authorizing maintenance battalions to fabricate elevation stops for every Sherman and 3rd Armored Division. I'm also ordering gunnery instructors to develop training protocols. Every gunner will qualify on high-angle fire before their next combat mission. The technique spread through informal channels faster than official orders could propagate. Tank crews talked to other tank crews. Gunners explained the method during evening maintenance sessions. Russo elevation didn't require new equipment, didn't require official authorization, just required willingness to elevate your gun 5 degrees over standard and aim at targets doctrine said were out of range. By August 15th, approximately 140 Sherman tanks in 3rd Armored Division were using the technique. The innovation jumped divisions through crew transfers and radio chatter. A 4th Armored Division tank commander heard 3rd Armored crews discussing Russo elevation on open radio nets. Asked for details. Tried it with his own gunner. Killed a Panther at 1,400 yards on his first attempt. 4th Armored Division adopted the technique within 48 hours. 2nd Armored Division heard about it from tank crews meeting at supply points. Mechanics from different divisions talked during maintenance operations. Word spread. By August 25th, estimated 400 Sherman tanks across multiple divisions were using high-angle engagement techniques. The official Army designation was Extended Range High-Angle Engagement Protocol. Nobody used the official designation. Every tank crew in France called it Russo elevation. The kill statistics told the story. 1st Battalion, 32nd Armored Regiment, August 9th through August 31st. 47 German tanks destroyed using high-angle fire. American tank losses during the same period, 11 Shermans. First positive exchange ratio against Panthers in the European theater. 3rd Armored Division statistics for August. 93 German tanks destroyed, 31 American tanks lost. Exchange ratio, 3-to-1 American favor. In July, before Russo elevation, 3rd Armored Division ratio had been 2-to-1 German favor. The technique had reversed the mathematics of tank warfare. By September 1st, estimated 800 Sherman tanks across France were using plunging fire tactics. German intelligence noticed. German Panzer commanders first reported unusual American tank behavior in early September 1944. After-action reports from multiple engagements described Shermans firing at extreme ranges with unexpected accuracy. Panthers being destroyed from positions German crews had considered safe. The pattern was consistent across multiple sectors. American tanks engaging at 1,400 to 1,700 yards. Rounds impacting from steep angles. Penetrations through turret roof armor. German tank crews called it Regenfeuer, rainfire. By September 10th, German intelligence officers at 7th Army headquarters were analyzing destroyed Panthers recovered from recent battlefields. They discovered impact patterns that didn't match standard American tank gunnery. Shell impacts on turret tops instead of frontal armor. Penetration angles suggesting plunging fire trajectories. The analysts reached the correct conclusion. Americans had developed high-angle firing techniques that exploited German armor vulnerabilities. A report dated September 14, 1944, sent to Panzer Group West headquarters, stated, American Sherman tanks now engaging at ranges previously considered safe, utilizing plunging fire to target turret roof armor. Panther and Tiger turret roof protection inadequate against direct 75mm fire at steep angles. recommend immediate tactical adjustments and armor reinforcement protocols. German response came in two forms. First, tactical modifications. Panzer commanders received orders to avoid static positions at long range. Keep moving. Don't establish hull-down positions, where American tanks could range your position and drop plunging fire onto your turret. But tactical modifications couldn't fix the fundamental problem. Panther turret roof armor was 40 millimeters thick. Tiger turret roof was 44 millimeters. Designed to resist artillery fragments and aircraft rockets, not direct tank fire. German engineers began recommending turret roof reinforcement. Add 20 millimeters of applique armor to all new production Panthers and Tigers. Retrofit existing vehicles during depot maintenance. But production modifications took time. New armor designs required testing. Manufacturing processes needed adjustment. Retrofitting existing tanks required pulling them from frontline service. Meanwhile, Panthers continued dying to American plunging fire. The psychological impact on German tank crews was significant. For 2 years, Panther crews had owned long-range engagements. Could kill Shermans from 1,400 yards, while American return fire fell harmlessly short. That advantage had disappeared in 3 weeks. Now Shermans were killing Panthers from ranges Panthers thought they controlled. German crews became cautious, hesitant, started questioning whether any range was actually safe. Staff Sergeant Paul Martinez destroyed 3 Panthers using high-angle fire during September 1944. September 7th, near Metz. Panther at 1,500 yards, turret roof penetration. September 19th, near Nancy. Panther at 1,600 yards, ammunition detonation. September 26th, near Luneville. Panther at 1,400 yards, catastrophic kill. Martinez survived the entire war. Returned to El Paso in May 1945. Worked as a mechanic for 37 years. When asked about the war, he always mentioned Russo. Russo saved my life 3 times. Every time I elevated that gun 5 degrees, I thought about his toolbox. Thought about how one forgotten tool changed everything. That's what innovation looks like. Not fancy engineering. Just a sergeant who understood math and a toolbox left in the wrong place. Corporal James Wilson, 4th Armored Division, learned the Russo elevation technique in late August from 3rd Armored Crews. His first kill using high-angle fire came September 7th at 1,500 yards. Wilson's tank commander reported the engagement to battalion headquarters with obvious pride. New gunner got his first kill today using that Russo technique from 3rd Armored. Hit a Panther at 1,500 yards like he'd been doing it his whole life. Wilson survived the war, returned to Birmingham, worked in steel mills until retirement. Post-war interview, 1973. We went from being targets to being hunters. That's what the Russo elevation did. Before August, we ran from Panthers. After August, Panthers ran from us. Lieutenant Robert Hayes commanded a Sherman platoon in 2nd Armored Division. Lost 2 tanks in his platoon to long-range Panther fire in July. Both engagements followed the same pattern. Panthers at 1,500 yards, American return fire ineffective. 2 Shermans destroyed before Hayes could call for artillery support. Hayes heard about Russo elevation in early September through informal channels. Tank commanders talking during evening briefings. Mechanics discussing the technique during maintenance operations. Hayes had his gunners practice high-angle fire at a training range behind American lines. Destroyed target hulks at 1,400 to 1,600 yards. 70% hit rate after 3 days of practice. Hayes's platoon adopted the technique officially on September 12th. Never lost another tank to long-range fire for the remainder of the war. Hayes wrote in his personal diary, September 28th, 1944. The Germans owned the long-range fight until some sergeant named Russo figured out how to shoot back. Now we own it. Amazing what one forgotten toolbox can accomplish. Sergeant Frank Russo received no official recognition for developing high-angle tank gunnery. No medal, no commendation, no mention in division orders. The Army Ordnance Department eventually studied the technique in October 1944 after repeated requests from field commanders. A team of 3 engineers traveled to France, observed high-angle fire demonstrations, measured impact angles, calculated trajectory mathematics. Their official report, dated October 27, 1944, concluded, "High-angle firing technique demonstrates effectiveness against German armor at extended ranges." However, technique violates established gunnery doctrine and creates inconsistent results dependent on crew skill level. Recommend continued observation, but no formal doctrinal modification at this time. The real reason for refusing doctrinal change was bureaucratic inertia. Officially endorsing a technique that violated training protocols would require rewriting gunnery manuals, revising training programs, admitting that field soldiers had discovered something doctrine writers had missed. Easier to let the technique spread informally while maintaining official disapproval. High-angle engagement continued spreading through American tank battalions, regardless of official disapproval. By November 1944, estimated 800 Sherman tanks were using Russo elevation. The technique never became official U.S. Army doctrine during World War II, never appeared in training manuals, never received formal designation beyond extended range high-angle engagement. But tank crews knew the truth, called it Russo elevation from August 1944 through war's end in May 1945. The statistics from June through November 44 documented the technique's impact. June through August, before widespread adoption, 217 American tanks lost to long-range German fire. American to German tank exchange ratio, 3.4 to 1, German favor. September through November, after Russo elevation adoption, 83 American tanks lost to long-range fire. 62% reduction. Exchange ratio, 1.1 to 1, nearly even. 3rd Armored Division-specific statistics were even more dramatic. August 9th through August 31st, 47 German tanks destroyed using high-angle fire, 11 American tanks lost. September through November, 132 German tanks destroyed, 37 American tanks lost. Exchange ratio, 3.6 to 1, American favor. Conservative estimates suggested the Russo elevation technique destroyed between 300 and 400 German tanks between August and December 1944. Estimated 500 to 700 American tank crewmen survived engagements they would have lost under standard doctrine. 500 to 700 men who came home because a loader forgot his toolbox during evening maintenance. Sergeant Frank Russo survived the entire war. Cobra King fought from Normandy through Germany. Russo was in the gunner's seat when 3rd Armored Division crossed into Germany in September 1944. Was there when they reached the Rhine in March 1945. Was there when Germany surrendered May 8, 1945. Russo returned to the Bronx in July 1945. 25 years old, 307 days of combat, 16 confirmed tank kills, 0 wounds. He went back to work in his father's machine shop. Married Angela Romano in September 1947. Had 3 children, 2 daughters, 1 son. Took over his father's business in 1952, ran the shop for 41 years until retirement in 1993. Russo rarely spoke about the war, didn't attend veteran reunions, didn't join veteran organizations. When people asked about his service, he said he'd been a tank gunner. When they asked if he'd seen combat, he said yes. When they asked about the famous shot that changed tank doctrine, he always gave the same answer. "I got lucky. Chen forgot his toolbox, that's all." Eddie Chen would respond, "Russo made the shot. I just left tools in the wrong place." Chen returned to San Francisco after the war. His parents had been released from the internment camp. Chen went to college on the GI Bill, earned an engineering degree from Berkeley, worked as a mechanical engineer for Lockheed for 34 years, designed precision tooling systems for aircraft manufacturing, kept the 5-pound steel toolbox from Cobra King his entire life, mounted it in a display case in his workshop with a brass plaque. This toolbox accidentally changed American tank doctrine, August 9, 1944. 3 Panthers destroyed. Hundreds of American lives saved. Lieutenant James Whitmore made the Army his career. Stayed in service after the war, promoted to captain in 1947, major in 1952, lieutenant colonel in 1958, full colonel in 1963. Retired 1967 after 26 years service. Taught armor tactics at Fort Knox during his final assignment. Always included Russo elevation in his lectures. Told every class of young officers, "Best innovations come from soldiers who question doctrine respectfully, but think independently. Doctrine provides framework. Combat requires adaptation. Remember that." Corporal Mickey Sullivan drove trucks after the war. Chicago, married, 4 children. Private Daniel Kowalski worked factory jobs in Detroit, married, 2 children. The entire crew of Cobra King survived the war, all 5 men. They reunited annually starting 1950, every August 9th, anniversary of the first high-angle kill. Met at different locations, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, told stories about forgotten toolboxes and burning Panthers and the day doctrine stopped mattering. Last reunion, August 9th, 1993. 4 old men in a hotel restaurant. Sullivan, Chen, Whitmore, Russo. Kowalski had died in 1991. They raised glasses, told the story one more time. Russo died October 1996, age 76. Heart attack. Chen died March 2001, age 80. Cancer. Whitmore died June 2003, age 85. Pneumonia. Sullivan died January 2007, age 85. Stroke. Last surviving member of Cobra King crew gone. But the toolbox remains.